What's up everyone, and welcome back to my Echoes of Time channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. How did colonial America keep clean? In the 1700s, people had to find a balance between their social status, religious beliefs, and common sense when it came to personal hygiene. Colonial American men and women had different habits when it came to cleaning their bodies and clothes, which often made them sick and caused trouble. Even though the original colonies were different from each other, hygiene in America's first cities and rural villages was always bad. It was impossible to avoid smells, dirt, and garbage in everyday life. People in the lowest classes were just trying to survive, while people in the middle and upper classes were trying, usually without success, to avoid or hide everyday annoyances like mosquitoes. People thought that dirt and grime were indicators of bad manners and laziness, therefore not being clean was not acceptable. There are so many things to think about. Let's look at how people kept clean in the early colonies. People bathed with a pail of water and a wet cloth. In the 17th and 18th centuries, full-body baths were uncommon and primarily intended for infants, administered to harden rather than to cleanse. Men, women, and kids cleaned their hands and faces every morning, but that was about it for bathing. People would use a bowl, cloth, and maybe a sponge to clean themselves whenever they could find a place to be alone. People took baths a lot, but they didn't use soap. Swimming was another way, but going into a lake or stream nearby was more for cooling off than for washing. Bathtubs were too small for a sponge bath, therefore only rich people could afford them. Protestantism saw sin as being dirty. Doctors had different opinions about personal hygiene. Some thought that oils and other such things were very important for staying healthy. Some people believed that staying clean was very important for avoiding illness and disease. In colonial America, religious beliefs had a big effect on how people bathed and what they thought was clean, which made those feelings even stronger. Puritans connected dirt to sin and the devil, which had effects on society as well. People who took baths were less likely to sin, break the law, or be poor since morality and cleanliness were tightly linked. The water was cleansing from head to toe, and the filthiness of person engendering filthiness of mind. Clean bodies, clean clothes, clean homes, and clean communities all had an effect on spiritual health. But the Puritans had a hard time believing that bathing was harmful for morals. People thought that public baths were a cause of sexual impropriety and sickness, in particular. Anyone could pull teeth. In colonial America, there were no real dentists, so if someone needed a tooth pulled, they had to go to the barber, surgeon, chemist, or even the blacksmith. Before this kind of treatment was needed, people used opium, alcohol, chamomile, and figs as natural medications to dull toothaches. People often replaced teeth that had been taken out, but they didn't take care of their teeth while they were still in their mouths. Sometimes the tooth that was taken out was put back in its socket. More often, implants and dentures were used. They either utilized ivory and metal, shaped wood to fit, or got new teeth from poor people who were prepared to trade their good teeth. George Washington was the most famous person in the colonies to wear dentures. His dentures were made of metal, wire, and animal teeth. But his face was misshapen, and his mouthpiece hurt all the time. Powdered wigs were both the reason for and the solution to lice. People of the middle and upper classes in colonial America wore wigs with powder on them. Both men and women wore wigs made from animal and human hair. They often wore their own hair quite short. Shaving one's head also helped prevent lice out of one's hair, which was a common problem. But wigs were also vulnerable to bugs, so people either had slaves and servants dress them or sent them out for regular care to keep them clean and presentable. Cleaning wigs once a week is best, but this was expensive, so people sometimes went weeks or even months without doing it. You could get rid of lice by boiling wigs, and they were sometimes perfumed to keep bugs away. Other favorite scents were bergamot, bay leaves, and sassafras. Pomades used to form wigs attracted flies that got stuck in the sticky stuff. Oils and powders also covered over the person's smell and the hair itself. People used privy pots and outhouses to throw away all kinds of things. There were outhouses, or more accurately, covered pits in the ground, near the cottages of colonial families. People might use the chamber pot in the outhouse if they couldn't or didn't want to go there. Chamber pots were often simply tossed out of a window or close to the home, but they required to be emptied on a regular basis. In rural places, people often lived near bodies of water. Human waste got into lakes, rivers, and streams and contaminated drinking water, which spread disease. But when privy pots were dug up in cities like Philadelphia in 2014, they found more than just regular human and household trash. Archaeologists found glasses, bottles, bowls, and drinking tankards in a dozen brick-lined latrine shafts behind what looked like an illegal bar. Wig curlers, tanning kits, and pottery made and used by local artisans were among the other items. Rebecca Yaman, an archaeologist, says that even though there was human excrement, the find, which dates back to the time of the Revolutionary War, felt more like people drinking and talking politics and arguing. Early colonists only had one utensil to clean their teeth and ears. Archaeologists at Jamestown uncovered a silver ear picker at the spot where the first fort was built in the 1990s. The early 17th century invention comprised a small scooping tool at one end and a pointed pick at the other. Ear picks were used for a lot of hygiene functions, such cleaning nails and picking teeth. The ear picker's spoon-like side was helpful in harvesting the valuable substance in addition to being used to remove earwax. To preserve the thread from unraveling, earwax was used instead of beeswax. People used lye soap to wash their clothes and dishes instead of their bodies. Most colonists made their own soap or bought it from stores nearby. Rich colonists, on the other hand, would have brought fragrant soaps from Europe. Lye soap, which was made from animal fat, lye and ash, was quite harsh and could only be used to clean dishes, clothes, and some parts of the house in colonial America. Making lye soap was a lot of work and smelled bad, and the people who created it didn't pay much attention to measurements. Using lye soap made doing laundry a lot harder in colonial America. The corrosive concoction made the hard work even harder, as did hauling water, starting fires, wringing out clothes, and hanging items up to dry. So, only the worst clothes like diapers, aprons, and underwear were cleaned on a regular basis. Dysentery was frequent in the early colonies. In colonial America, disease spread because there was not enough cleanliness in both rural and urban areas. Animal poop, rubbish, and other kinds of dirt might be found in the streets. Outhouses and privy pots were often close to homes and water sources. Typhoid fever, cholera, and dysentery were some of the most common diseases, especially in the hot summer months. In 1676, a bloody flux outbreak in Boston killed many of the city's children. That same year, Nathaniel Bacon Jr., the leader of Bacon's Rebellion, died from the disease. The waterborne disease often spread, infecting both soldiers and civilians. In December 1777, when George Washington and his 2,000-man army camped at Valley Forge, about two-thirds of them died from the flu, typhoid, and dysentery. Military officials also knew that summer campaigns were risky, but the colonial effort may have succeeded because many British men in the South got sick with different fevers. The first settlers complained about vermin. Captain John Smith, 1580 to 1631, was an explorer, settler, and prominent leader of the Jamestown colony. He wrote a lot about his time in the Americas. He talked of mosquitoes and flies and a certain India bug, called by the Spaniards a kakaruk, the which creeping into chests they eat and defile with their ill-scented dung. He also said that ants were irritating. George Washington 1732 to 1799 said that his blanket was double its weight of vermin, such as lice, fleas, and so on. The colonists also had to contend with lice. Washington, a young man exploring the Shenandoah Valley in 1748, found himself in a cabin full with bugs. But he learned his lesson and slept outside by the fire on later trips. George Henry Losekeel, a Christian missionary, had a bigger problem with bugs. He called them living ashes, which were a troublesome plague to both man and beast. Losekeel says that the Indians called them such because their bites were as painful as the burning of red-hot ashes. Men were the only ones who shaved. Individuals in North America didn't shave when they first got there. It wasn't until the middle of the 18th century that individuals started to have smooth, hairless faces. Men, on the other hand, went to the barber when they needed a shave. Professional barbers used straight razors to shave people. But some thought becoming a barber was a bad job because of its racial overtones. Many slaves shaved their masters while free non-whites worked as barbers because white labor was seen to be too valuable for the task. Women usually didn't show much skin, therefore there isn't much proof that they shaved any part of their bodies. Women weren't even allowed to remove their facial hair since it was dangerous and bloodbaths could only be prevented by experienced hands. Women may have instead utilized depilatory treatments or plucked their hair. There were a lot of medical books that were sent out all throughout England and the colonies, like The Birth of Mankind 1540, that had recipes for depilatories that used limestone, arsenic, and other things. Military officials knew how important it was to be clean, yet they had a hard time doing so. George Washington made it clear during the Revolutionary War that cleanliness and sanitation were essential to health and service. He told his officers to be ready in case a sickness or epidemic broke out in the military camps. Washington knew that military camps were places where diseases spread, but his main concern at the time was smallpox. He later called for troops to be vaccinated against it. Soldiers had to wash their clothes once a week and their hands and faces every day. A lot of guys didn't pay attention to these rules. The followers traveled with the army and cooked and cleaned for them to keep the camp clean. One witness said that women provided important services to males who were not used to doing things like this, and would rather let their linen, etc., rot on their backs than have to clean themselves. People thought that women's body odor was a way for them to protect themselves. People in colonial America had different ideas about bathing, but some of the country's founding fathers were very clear about how they felt about women's hygiene. Thomas Jefferson famously told his daughter Martha, "Nothing is so disgusting to our sex as a want of cleanliness and delicacy in yours." Doctors in the late 1700s told ladies to take a bath to help with disorders that affected the female reproductive system. Even although Virginia Dr. Thomas Ewell agreed with the common belief that women were so made that they smelled bad, to keep men from being too devoted, sanitation was more vital. Some women thought the smell was a way to defend themselves by making themselves as horrible as possible, but every woman found the smell unpleasant.